Good afternoon, my name is Eric Palencia Gutiérrez, and I would like to present my personal essay for the Piece of Evidence 1, EZLN. The initial problem. The North American Free Trade Agreement went into effect on the 1st of January of 1994. This agreement proposed the privatization of communal lands, or ejidos, as we know them in Spanish, in opposition to the consequences that said project would have for the indigenous peoples of Mexico. The Zapatista National Liberation Army declared war on the Mexican government and took over several towns in Chiapas. When communities in other states, such as Guerrero or Veracruz, joined the cause, more than 100 people were killed in the initial battles. There were several skills that the Mexican government lacked when dealing with this conflict, and I would like to point out some of them. Recognizing their position as a dominant group toward the EZLN to better assess the situation, going beyond nationalist discourse into multiculturalism with interculturalism as the ultimate goal. They would also have to avoid othering its own citizens as a tactic to discredit their efforts towards the respect of their rights. Understanding the oppression that indigenous peoples had been subjected to prior to the uprising was important as well, and having an intersectional approach to the conflict, distinguishing between the different groups represented by the EZLN, because they didn't only represent indigenous people, but also the elderly, women, children, who were indigenous people, and who were also in situations of extreme poverty. And with that, the position of the EZLN was made clear. They had several goals in mind with its armed uprising. For one of them was the land reform and redistribution. There was also political and cultural autonomy for the indigenous people that they sought. In fact, it was looking for the rights to self-determination and autonomy. They also wanted to stand in opposition to the NAFTA, as well as to the current government at the moment, which was PRIS. And they also wanted to be recognized as a group with credibility. This becomes more important once we know what the Mexican state was looking to do. As the EZLN rose, the Mexican government took certain measures towards the conflict. Some of those were discrediting the efforts of the EZLN by treating them as a guerrilla group. And as I commented earlier, they were othering the EZLN and other groups represented by it. They wanted to end the conflict as quickly as possible, be it by force or by dialogue. Well, they also didn't want to give up certain benefits that they were already having from this oppression of indigenous peoples in Mexico, which meant they wanted to continue with the NAFTA and avoid any changes or any significant changes made to it, as well as remaining as a multicultural and unified nation. So the Mexican project remained important. There were also several international organizations that were part of this conflict. Each one of them had their own actions and perspective on the conflict itself. Some of them are the following. ECOSOC accepted the violation of indigenous people's rights by the Mexican government. The International Red Cross developed medical and assistance programs for the civilians in the affected zones. And Amnesty International called both groups to ensure full respect of human rights of the population in the municipalities and roads in Chiapas, primarily. And as the San Andres Accords or agreements came into place, there were certain things that were carried out around them that weren't properly executed. One of the most important issues with the execution of that came prior to the San Andres Accords was the betrayal of 1995 by former President Ernesto Zedillo, in which war strategies against the EZLN were made public, and that was after the ceasefire of 1994. It wasn't well received by the public, and that's the main reason why in 1996 the Zedillo's cabinet decided to go into the San Andres Accords. But it wouldn't have happened had the public not risen against that initial movement. Another problem was that the conflict only reached the war status in the first place because the groups represented by the EZLN had been ignored for decades. As a communication to make changes about indigenous peoples' rights remains only through the executive power, the demands were always left unattended. And overall, I believe that respecting and properly executing all the propositions made in the San Andres Accords, instead of rejecting them, would have de-escalated this situation and allowed for progress to be made, or to be made quicker. Here are some of my references, and I'd like to thank you for your attention on my project.